Hello, welcome back to Intro to Programming. I've got some good news or potentially some bad news. Depends on your take. This is actually going to be the last day that we spend with Google Sheets. So for some of you, that might be really sad. For some of you, that might be a moment of joy. But like I said at the beginning, the class is not about Google Sheets. We're just using it to introduce a few different programming concepts. So, the first day we looked at variables and sort of looping behavior, which you're going to find in almost any programming language. The second day we looked at logic statements and if statements, which again pop up in just about any programming language. And today we're going to look sort of at debugging, like how to find a mistake, and then also data retrieval. And data retrieval is where we're going to start to run into sort of some limitations. All right, we're going to see that in a Google Sheet, there are ways we can retrieve data, but they're not very good. And that's going to push us towards the database, which is sort of our next big topic. All right, a database is sort of an electronic way of storing information. If you think about a website like Amazon, they have a database of all of their products. If you think about Ichabod Crane, they have like a database of all of their students. So it's a way to store a lot of electronic information. And if you're storing a lot of information, you also need a way to retrieve that information. So we're going to look at a little bit of that today, but we're going to see that it's pretty limited in Google Sheets, which is going to push us towards databases starting next class. All right. So on this front page here, we're going to just start with a little bit of a review from last class. And statements, or statements, if statements, they're all really important to programming. So I just want to touch on them one more time before we move on. So the goal for today is going to be to write a little program on this page that determines not only whether somebody gets a Regents diploma, but whether or not they actually earn the advanced Regents diploma. So in New York State, there's an advanced Regents diploma, there's a regular Regents diploma, and there's actually lots of other designations, but we're only going to worry about these two. So our program will eventually tell us whether each of these students, Allie, Ben, Chris, Dave, Eric, Frank, George, Hank, Iris, Jack, Kristen, Laura, Marge, Nick, Olivia, Pete, Quinn, Rick, Sarah, Tina, Ursula, Valeria, Walter, Xavier, Yale, or Zoe got an advanced Regents diploma, a Regents diploma, or no diploma at all. So the main difference between the advanced and the regular, let's get that out of the way first, is that for the regular Regents, you need to pass English, Global, US. Those are required. And then after that, you just need one math and one science. It doesn't matter which. With the advanced Regents, you still need Global, US, and English. That hasn't changed. But now you need to pass all three math, and you need to pass biology, and then one additional science. Doesn't matter which one, as long as there's one additional science. So we can see, naturally, the advanced Regents is a little harder to get. Now, to make our lives easier, over here in the spreadsheet, instead of doing grades, I just used true and falses. True means you passed, false means you failed. And I condensed Global, US, and English down into one category. So instead of having it be three separate categories, it's just one category, which will make our program a little shorter when we're writing this. So I'm about to do that right over here and kind of walk you through it, but I encourage you to try it on your own. Like if you think you know how to do this, if you're like, I think I've got an idea and I want to give it a try, pause the video, give it a try, and then if you run into a roadblock, you can just come back and see how you did. All right, so advanced Regents. We're going to start with our equal sign. Actually, let me zoom in so that it's a little easier to see. Zoom 125. All right, we're going to start with our equal sign. We're going to type the word and. Now, if you remember from last class, when we use the word and, everything inside of the and has to be true if you want the whole thing to be considered true. So with an and, think about this, like your parents tell you to pick up your room and mow the grass, they expect you to do both. Everything has to be true, and if you don't do one of them, they're going to be upset. Same thing in programming. With the and statement, everything has to be true, and if even one thing is not true, the whole thing is considered false. So we're going to start with our and we're going to say, all right, C7 has to be true. All right, and because it's already true, false, we don't have to say like equals true. We can just say and C7. Now for the advanced Regents, they have to pass all three math. So we can just keep going here and say comma D7, comma E7, comma F7. That takes care of the math. Now for science, they need to pass bio and then one other. So bio, we can just add to the list. That would be G7. And now we have to do something different because we can't just say and chem and earth science and physics because they only have to pass one of them. All right, that's where the or statement comes in. So I'm going to type a comma. I'm going to type the word or. I'm going to do a left parenthesis. And with an or, only one piece has to be true. All right, you could have 30 pieces, and if 29 of them are false and one of them is true, the whole statement counts as true. So going back to our previous example, if your parents say, pick up your room or cut the grass, they're really only asking you to do one or the other. If you do both, great. They're not going to complain, but only one is actually required. Same idea here in programming. With an or statement, only one of the elements has to be true. So we're going to do or H7, comma, I7, comma, J7. Then we're going to close the parentheses for the or, and we're going to close the parentheses for the and. So we're saying all of these pieces are required, and then when we get to this part, only one of those pieces is required, right? And if we hit enter, it'll tell us that Allie earned her Advanced Regents diploma, and if we drag that down, it'll figure it out for everybody else. All right, now, you can still graduate high school without an Advanced Regents. You can just get a regular Regents diploma. So let's do that one as well. All right, we're going to start with the and, just like we did before. We're going to start with Global US English, just like we did before. We're going to hit our comma. And now we don't need to pass all three math. We only need to pass one. So if we're only passing one, that brings us back to the or statement. So OR, left parenthesis. Then I'm going to click on algebra, comma, geometry, comma, trig. I'm going to close the parentheses. That represents just needing to pass one math exam. Then I'm going to do a comma, and I'm going to do the same thing for science. Because for science, again, I only need to pass one exam. So I've got C7, comma, or, and then D7, E7, F7, close the parentheses, comma, and then the word or again, left parenthesis, and then I'm going to click on these sciences, G7, comma, H7, comma, I7, comma, J7. I'm going to close the parentheses on the or, and then I'm going to close the parentheses on the and. So what this is saying is Global US English is required, then one math is required, and then one science is required. If I hit enter and drag it down, whoops, a little too far. All right, it'll fill in the rest of those for me. All right. So last step is going to be where we incorporate our if statements. All right, so we have three options. We have the advanced diploma, we have the Regents diploma, we have no diploma. All right, so an if statement usually lets us only choose between two options. So if we're going to do three, that means we're actually going to need to string two if statements together. So we'll start with equals if. We're going to do a left parenthesis. We'll start with the harder of the two, so advanced Regents, and we're going to say if this is true, comma, you can just print out the word advanced. Right, so that's inside of quotes, and then we're going to do another comma, and this is what happens if it's not true. So if K7 is false, we don't just get to automatically give them a Regents diploma, we have to do another test. So we're going to do if, then we're going to look at L7. If L7 is true, that means they get a Regents diploma. If L7 is not true, now we don't need a second test, all right? Because now we're down to the last option. So the last option is just that they get no diploma, all right? And then, again, make sure you've got L7, comma, and then Regents in quotes, comma, and then none in quotes. And then I'm going to do a right parenthesis to close the second if statement, and then another right parenthesis to close the first if statement, all right? And then if I hit enter and drag that down. Hopefully, everything we drag down is going to match this column to the right. So that's like your quick error check to make sure that it went okay. And if we scan it quickly, all right, let's hope I didn't make a mistake because I don't really want to have to go back and find it right now. I think we're good. All right, so everything matches up. So again, just sort of a quick review of if statements, ands, and ors. If you tried it on your own, great. If you just followed along, that's fine too. Just getting that extra practice and reinforcement, because again, we are going to see these throughout the course. All right. With that said, let's move on to the second piece. So this second piece is data retrieval. So we've got a whole bunch of data. All right, here we have 26 students. We want an easy way to sort of search through that data and get some results without having to constantly like scan up and down. Because for 26 names, it's manageable, but what if there were 2,000 names? What if there were 3,000 names? What if there was a million different things, like if we're talking about like an Amazon or something? So we need a quick and easy way to sort of search through that. Now, Sheets has some options. We're going to see that they're a little limited, but we're going to explore them just the same so that you can get kind of a feel for how this works. So what we're going to build over here is a search box. And the way the search box is going to work is if we type in a name, it's going to tell us the student's ID. And after we type in a name, if we then also type in a subject, it's going to tell us whether or not they passed or failed that subject. So it's going to automatically go over into our spreadsheet there, find the information, and retrieve it for us. So how do we do this? Well, we do it using a function called VLOOKUP. So again, we're going to go into this yellow box here. All right, the white box is where we're going to type stuff. The yellow box is where we're going to write our formula. We're going to say equals VLOOKUP. Right? And whether you type it in all caps or lowercase, it'll work either way. And then we're going to do a left parenthesis. Now, the first thing VLOOKUP wants to know is it wants to know what you're searching for. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to click on this box right here, which is P8, which tells the function, hey, whatever somebody types in that box, that's where we're searching for. All right, that's the word that we're going to search for. Then we're going to do comma, and then we have to tell it where to search. All right, so it doesn't just automatically search the entire sheet. We have to tell it where to search. So we're going to go over here. We're going to start by left-clicking on Alley. We're going to hold down our mouse. We're going to drag over, and then we're going to drag down. All right, so that's telling it to look in this section. All I'm doing is looking up the ID number, so I don't have to highlight all this other stuff because all I need is the name and the ID number. All right, now I know with the trackpads, it's a little harder to actually scroll and highlight. So if you want to just type this out, it's P8, comma, A7, colon, B32. We're going to hit comma again. And this next part is we have to tell it what information to actually return. All right, it doesn't automatically know to return the student ID. We have to tell it what to return. So what it's going to do is it's going to go and look for the information in this column. So whatever name I type in, it's going to look for it in this column. And then I have to tell it what column to give back. So if I told it to give back column 1 and I searched for the word Dave, it would just give me back Dave. It would just say, oh, I found Dave. Here it is, which isn't very useful. If I said column 2, it would give me back the number 4. If I had highlighted more columns, I could have said column 3, column 4, column 5, column 6, and so on and so forth, but I only highlighted 2 columns. So it's going to search for the name in column 1. That's automatic. It always searches for the object in the left-hand column. And then it's going to return whatever column I tell it to return. So I want it to return column 2. So I'm going to type a 2 here. And then last but not least, I'm going to type the word false. And you don't really need to know what that does right now. Just trust me on this. You want to type the word false. All right, we'll talk about that on the next tab, what that actually means. So again, I've got VLOOKUP. left parenthesis P8, comma, A7 colon B32, comma 2, comma false, and then I close the parenthesis. And if I hit enter, you're going to see an NA, and that's because I haven't typed anything here yet. But if I were to type in a name, so let me type in the name Allie, it tells me that Allie is student ID 1. If I type in the name Zoe, it tells me that Zoe is ID 26. If I type in a name that doesn't exist, like Doug, it tells me that they have no student ID. All right, so we have a very simple kind of search functionality here. It's not great. Like if I misspell something or if I say David instead of Dave, nothing pops up. It's not smart enough to be like, oh, that's probably what they want. It has to be an exact match. All right. The other problem is it can only search the leftmost column. All right. So if I had names in like 3 different columns, this VLOOKUP wouldn't work. It only searches the leftmost column that you highlight. So I could only search this column right here. So very quickly, you're seeing it's limited. All right. It works and you can use it. And there's times when it's pretty useful, but it also has some major limitations. So we've got to keep that in mind. All right. Now, let's see the second part here. So this is where we're going to search for the subject. All right. Well, the subject, instead of a VLOOKUP, V is for vertical, we're going to do an HLOOKUP. So H is for horizontal. So I'm going to type HLOOKUP, left parenthesis. Now, the first part is exactly the same as VLOOKUP. I'm just going to say where I want it to look. So I want it to look in this box. I want to see what they've typed, and that box is R8. So you can type in the R8 if you need to. I'm going to type in a comma. All right, so I've got R8, comma. Now I have to highlight where to look, just like I did before. So I'm going to start with Global US English. I'm going to go over to physics. And then I'm going to go down. I don't need the other stuff because I'm only searching for exams. So I've got Global US English, over, and then down. And again, if you've got a trackpad and it's hard to actually highlight that, it's C6 colon J32 should give you everything. And then comma, and then just like the VLOOKUP, I have to tell it which row I want it to return. All right, and this is where we're going to get a little clever. And we're going to use these ID numbers to tell us which row we want to return. So Allie's ID number is 1, and we want to return row 1. Ben's ID number is 2, and we want to return row 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this ID number that we just looked up to know which row we want. All right, and this is just trying to like sort of cleverly use those numbers and things to our advantage. So we're going to use Q8 there. And then again, we're going to type in the word false, just like before. So again, it's equal HLOOKUP, R8, comma, C6 colon J32, comma, Q8, comma, false. All right, and if I hit enter, it's going to say NA again because I haven't actually typed in anything. But let's say I typed in, which one do I want to do? Let's say physics. All right. If I type in physics, it tells me that I passed it. And let's see, did I actually pass physics? Yes, I did. All right. It was one of the few things I did pass. All right. So usually it's a good idea to test more than just one. Right? It's usually a good idea to test multiple cases. And usually you want to test things at the extremes and you want to test things in the middle. So let's try Zoe. All right. And we'll try Zoe and algebra. So Zoe. And then we'll try algebra. Let's see. It says that Zoe and algebra should be true. And if we scroll down here, all right, that's our algebra column. So that seems to check out. And then let's try Allie. She's our other extreme. Oh, that's weird. So it says the subject is algebra, and then it says pass-fail algebra. Let's try a different one, geometry. And then it just says geometry. Physics, and then it just says physics. That's weird. It's almost like there's a mistake in our program, which is weird because I was the one that wrote it and I don't make mistakes. Oh, I know what happened. I made the mistake on purpose so that we could talk about this. That's what happened. So again, this is why you check things at the extremes, because if things are going to break, usually you're going to see it at the extremes. And actually, if you had tested more things in the middle, you would have also seen that things aren't quite right. So if you remember, I said we were going to be kind of clever and use the student ID to tell us which row to go to. Problem with that. All right, technically, this row that we highlighted is row 1. All right, so even though Allie's ID number is 1, this is technically row 2, this is technically row 3, row 4, row 5. All right, so I said we were being clever, but we actually were not being, we were being clever, but, you know, not clever enough, let's say it that way. And this is why it's important to test your code, because a computer is going to do exactly what you tell it to do, not what you mean it to do. All right, what we meant is find Allie's score, find Ben's score. What we told it to do was actually find the score 1 row up. So when we typed in algebra for Allie, all it did was give us the word algebra back. When we typed in algebra for Ben, it was actually giving us Allie's score. If we type in algebra for Frank, it's actually going to give us Eric's score. So it's going to tell us that he failed algebra, even though technically he passed algebra. All right, so it's always 1 row off. So we can fix this, but testing is an important part of computer science. It's not enough just to write the code and assume that it works. You need to test it, and you need to test it exhaustively, which means test the lowest possible values, test the highest possible values, test a bunch in the middle to make sure that your program functions correctly in all situations. All right? It's easy to get cocky and just be like, the code runs, I didn't get any errors, it must be perfect. There's going to be a lot of times when your code runs and there's not any errors, but it doesn't actually do what you want it to do. All right, we call that a logical error in programming. And they can be just as common as syntax errors, which is when you like use the wrong word or forget a comma or forget something like that. Actually, as you start programming more, you're going to make less and less syntax errors, but you're going to make more and more logical errors, because as the programs get more complicated, it's easier to make these logical errors. So again, just driving home the point, it's important to test things. All right, so to fix this, all we have to do is if you double click on this word false, or whatever word happens to be there on your screen right now, it'll show you the formula again. So we've got our R8, C6, J32. Where it says Q8, I'm going to click right after the 8, and then I'm just going to type +1. All right, and that'll shift that number down 1 so that we always get the appropriate value. All right, so now it's going to tell me that Frank passed algebra, and if I switch it back to Allie, it's no longer going to say algebra, it's actually going to give me her result. And if I check Zoe, it's going to give me her result as well. All right, so again, just this idea that you always need to test things. You can't just assume that it's going to work. You have to test things and really check things out exhaustively. All right, so that's sort of the first introduction to data retrieval and the VLOOKUP and the HLOOKUP. Now, again, these are very limited. All right, you can only look in sort of one direction. The match has to be totally exact. You can only return one value. So like I can only return the ID number or this result or this result. I can't return like them all separately. So there are a lot of limitations. All right, but it does have some purposes, it does have some value, and it does work. Like we do have a search box here that will let us look up a result without having to go and search through the spreadsheet. But it's limited, we're gonna have to do better, and that's what we'll do in the weeks ahead. Now, if we flip over to the second tab, we just have another example. So if you remember from last class, we did that we did that if statement where we could tell between an A, a B, a C, a D, and an F. All right, that's great, but grades often have A plus A minus B plus B, B minus C plus C, C minus D, F. All right. If we were to do this all with if statements, that would be a lot of if statements. All right. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 choices, which means we'd need 10 different if statements to cover those 11 choices. My eyes hurt just thinking about all those parentheses. So what's a better way we can do this? All right. We can also use VLOOKUP in this sort of situation. All right. We can use this table and use it to sort of look up values. Now, for this to work, a couple important notes. Notice how this is an order. So if you're going to use it as if you're going to use VLOOKUP to look something up in a table, it has to be in order. And then that last part where we had said false previously, we're now going to use the word true, and that's going to allow us to look it up. So let me show you how this works. We're going to go equals VLOOKUP, just like we did before. We're going to do a left parenthesis. We're going to look up Allie's grade. So we're going to click on B2. We're going to hit comma. We're going to tell it where to search. So we're going to have it search over here. And again, I don't need to highlight the headings because it's not searching in the headings. It's just searching in these numbers. Right. I have to tell it which column I want back. So again, it's going to search in the left-hand column, but I want it to report back the letter, which is in the second column. So I'm going to type a 2. I'm going to hit comma again. And now I'm going to say true. And what true does is it means that the match doesn't have to be exact. All right. With this 85, it's going to say, oh, nope, I can't find an 85, but it falls between this 83 and 87. So I'm going to give Allie a B. All right. True allows for partial or non-exact matches. And it works for these ranges here. So as long as I set up these ranges, it's going to, anything from 0 to 64 is going to give an F. Anything from 65 to 69, it'll give a D. 70 on up, it'll give a C minus. And I don't have to go through and specify 0 to 100. I can use these ranges. And by saying true, the VLOOKUP will just find which range this value falls in. So if I hit enter, it'll give me a B. And then if I drag it down, it'll give me a C, which is right. And then it'll give me an A, which is right. And then not applicable. A plus, that's right. 83, that's right. But then not applicable, not applicable. A minus, A, 100 plus. So it seems like it's giving me the right grades, but then I'm getting a bunch of not applicables. So let's see what's happening. All right, so if I double click on that one, it looks good. If I double click on this one, oh, see again, it's always important to test things. It's important to check them out. I can see that my box has started moving down. All right, so when you drag a formula down, remember those boxes shift down unless you tell them to stay put. So it's looking it up correctly, but each time I go down, it's losing a grade that it can find. Like once I'm here, it can no longer find a D. Once I'm here, it can no longer find a C minus to an F, which is why once I get down here, the box is completely below everything else and it all breaks. So again, just to review, if we want to lock a block in place, I'm going to double click on this to bring the formula back. And then I can go to this H3 here and I can either manually type in the dollar signs or I can hit F4 and it'll put them in for me automatically. All right, so there they are automatically, but you can type them in by hand if you want, in front of the H, in front of the 3, in front of the I, in front of the 13. If I hit enter and re-drag it down, now it's going to look up all of those for me correctly. So again, you might think you have it right, but until you actually test it and try it for all your different possibilities, there might be a mistake in there that you didn't realize at first. All right. So again, just another way that you can use this search feature. So it does give you a little more flexibility because we can find things in ranges by changing that last word from false to true, but it's still very limited. All right, there's still only so much we can do with it. And again, that's what's going to bring us to next week when we start looking at databases. So what are you going to be doing today? All right, you are going to be making a little library system. All right, so what we have here is a product number, or we could call it, maybe why don't we call it book number? That makes a little more sense. Book name. I guess you could think of the book as a product, but we're going to use it. We're going to change it to book number and book name. And the way this is going to work is when somebody types in a number, right, which you can kind of think about it like in the library when like they scan your book. When they scan the book, it's reading in a number, and then all of the information about that book is popping up on the computer screen. Same idea here. When the user types in a number, we're going to look up the name, the date that it was taken out, the date that it's due back, and whether or not that book is currently late. All right, so we're going to write formulas that are going to do this and basically build a very basic library system. And I'll show you what the finished product is going to look like, and then you'll get to try it on your own. So over here is the finished product. Right now, they just all say NA because I haven't put any numbers in. But if I go over here and I type in the number 2, all right, it's going to automatically look up the book. It's going to tell me the book is Brave New World. It's going to tell me that it hasn't been taken out. And since it hasn't been taken out, it can't be due. And since it's not due, it can't be late. Now, let's take a look at one that has been taken out. So Animal Farm has been taken out. So if I type in a 1, it's going to tell me 1 is Animal Farm. It's going to tell me that it was taken out on this day. It's going to tell me that it's due on October 10th. And since October 10th hasn't happened yet, it's going to tell me that it's not late. All right, let's look at one that is late. All right, so Great Expectations. So if I type in the number 7, it's going to look up that book. It's going to say, oh, that's Great Expectations. It was taken out on August 31st, which means that it was due September 10th, which means that it's late. All right, and again, I could type in any of these numbers, and as long as it's a number that exists, it's going to look it up and tell me the information on that book. All right, so if I type in a number that doesn't exist, it's still going to say not applicable. But if I type in a number that does, it all fills in and gives me the appropriate information. So that's your end goal. All right, that's what you're hoping to do. To accomplish this, you're going to have to write 4 formulas. And then if you write them correctly, you should just be able to drag them down, drag them down, drag them down, drag them down. But to get it working, it's 4 formulas, 1 for each column, and then you drag it down. Now, if we go back to the blank one, I give you some advice on each of these. So it says use the number that the user types into column B to look up the book. All right, so this is going to be a VLOOKUP, and this is how the formula starts. All right, go and look at the other ones that we did to figure out how to finish it, but this is how the formula starts. This one says use the number that the user types into column B to look up the date due. So again, this is how the formula starts. You've got to figure out how to finish it so that you get the correct information. And then the last 2 are not VLOOKUPs. They're actually going to be if statements. So it's going to say if the date out equals NA, which means not applicable, then the date due is NA. Otherwise, add 10 to the date in column D. And to add 10 to the date in column D, you can just do D3 plus 10. But basically, you're going to have this if statement that says if D3 equals NA, you want it to print out the word NA. Otherwise, you want it to do this D3 plus 10. So this will tell you the date due. And then the late has 3 options. It can either be NA, meaning that it hasn't been taken out, or it can be late, or it cannot be late. So if there's 3 options, that means you're going to need more than one if statement. So if E3 equals NA, you can just print out NA, that's fine. Otherwise, you have to check to see whether or not it's late. All right, and we can find the current date using this today function. So if you're trying to figure out whether it's less than today, you can do this E3 less than today, and that will give you a true false based on whether it's before or after today. And then you just have to set up the rest of the if statement from there. So you've got kind of starter code for each of these. And if you set them up right, you should only have to type them in once at the start and then drag them down, drag them down, drag them down, and then just test it out. Make sure you test number 1, make sure you test number 26, test a bunch in the middle, test some that should be late, test some that should not be late, test some that have NA, test a number that's not listed and make sure that it doesn't give you something back. But you want to make sure that you test it exhaustively. You can't just assume that because it worked once, it's going to work on every single option. We saw that on that very first tab. It looked like it worked for some, but the more we tested it, the more we found that there were problems in our code. So after you finish this, make sure you test it on multiple values, across all possibilities to make sure that it's working correctly. All right. So again, best of luck with this. If you have any questions, make sure you email me. If anything goes wrong with the Google Classroom assignment, make sure you let me know and I will try to fix it as soon as possible. All right. Have a great day and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.